The 8-bit guy, David Murray, recently published a video that about the Commodore C65. It's a computer that prototype computer that Commodore created and never released. It's an interesting bit of 8-bit history. Go and watch it, absolutely. But towards the end, David said this.
This is the 4510 CPU, which is a 16-bit CPU that's backwards compatible with the 6502 series and runs at 3.5 MHz. This should be every bit as fast, if not faster, than the 7 MHz 68000 chip found in the Amiga, due to the different way which 6502 chips work.
Now, to be clear, this isn't the first time David has expressed this sentiment. He also did it in this video about the Amiga 1000.
The CPU was the Motorola 68000, a 16-bit CPU with even some 32-bit internal registers. It runs at 7.16 MHz. Now you might think it would be 7 times faster than the CPU in the Commodore 64, which runs at 1 MHz, but that's not actually the case. The 6502 and its variants are very efficient and perform a lot more operations per clock cycle than the 68000. In fact, if both CPUs were clocked at 1 MHz, the 6502 would achieve 0.43 MIPS, whereas the 68000 would only achieve 0.175 MIPS. But since the 68000 is clocked 7 times faster, it ends up being 1.25 MIPS, which means it's about 2.9 times faster than the C64. So yes, the CPU is more powerful, but probably not as much as people might think.
Now, this sentiment isn't new for David. 8 years ago, when he was not even the 8-bit guy, but the iBook guy, he published a video where he claimed that Steve Jobs and Apple made a mistake in going with the Apple Macintosh lines and instead should have gone with an Apple IIgs lines. And there he also compares the 68000 that the Macintosh had with the 65816 that the Apple IIgs was going with. And there he said this.
Now, the Mac CPU had almost 3 times the clock speed, though. Alright, now what might surprise you is that the Motorola chip used in the Mac was not as efficient per cycle as the WDC chip used in the Apple IIgs.
So, as you probably guessed, I take issue with this statement. Here's the thing. Now, this isn't the first time I'm bringing this up. In fact, as a response to 8-bit Guy's video. And the previous time I went really into the weeds and into the details. I built a program that does the same thing for the 6502 and the Motorola 68000 and compared how many cycles each took. If you're interested, check this link. But the gist of it is this. The 6502 and the CSG 4510, which the Commodore C65 has, is under the same category. I mean, it's faster than the 6502, but by around 25%. So a typical program running at the same clock speed will run about 25% faster. However, it's still an 8-bit CPU with an 8-bit architecture and an 8-bit bus. The 68000 is a 32-bit architecture CPU with a 16-bit bus, which means that the 6502 is designed to deal with 8-bit workloads, whereas the 68000 is designed to handle 32-bit workloads. And if you think about the 65816, which has a 16-bit architecture with a 24-bit theoretical bus, but actually it's a 16-bit address bus with 8-bit data bus. So when David says this,
okay, so both machines had a 16-bit CPU.
It's just not true. If the 65816 is a 16-bit CPU, then the 68000 is a 32-bit CPU. If the 68000 is a 16-bit CPU, then the 65816 is an 8-bit CPU. It's just it doesn't work. Here's the thing. 8-bit workloads mean addresses are known at compile time. Bulk transfers are in multiples of 256 bytes and are a single byte at a time. 32-bit workloads are memories dynamically allocated, and addresses are from anywhere to anywhere, and usually you access them in larger access units, 16 or 32 bit. And you can't really build multi-process operating system such as the Amiga multitasking Amiga DOS with the 6502 architecture, with an 8-bit architecture. It doesn't need to be the 6502. It can be the 65816. The architecture is still 16-bit and still geared toward the 8-bit kind of workloads where addresses are known at compile time. On the other hand, even if you don't go the Amiga route and you ask about the Apple Macintosh, which wasn't multitasking when it was first released, you could still load several programs into memory. And you can't do that with a 6502-ish architecture. So the idea that the Apple IIgs could have replaced the Macintosh, or that the Commodore C65 could replace the Amiga, it just doesn't compute. It doesn't add up. It wasn't possible. It was never possible. And the same goes for the clock speed. A single instruction, yeah, sure. A single instruction takes less cycles on the 6502, sometimes a lot less, and even less on the 4510, or it was also called the 65CE02. Sure, a single instruction may take less cycles, but a workload. And the thing about my video is that that wasn't a 32-bit workload. That was an 8-bit workload. And still, the 68000 did it in less cycles than the 6502. Now, granted, the 65CE02 may have done it faster, so it would be a little faster, but that's still an 8-bit workload. If you just double the word length, the 68000 would still accommodate it in a single opcode, whereas the 6502, it wouldn't even take twice as much. It would take longer because the program I wrote had optimizations geared toward the word size I was using, which couldn't be expanded. So this notion that cycle count and megahertz are everything you need to know how fast a computer is, it's just not true. It doesn't work. So yeah, I just had to get that off my chest. The idea that you can just compare cycles, opcodes per cycle, that's not how you measure computer performance or CPU performance. So that's all I had for you. Thank you.